Well, let me please welcome everyone, all of you, and everyone watching later to the fourth annual lecture of the Center for Multi-Religious Studies at Starr King School for the Ministry, featuring Ariella Aisha Azoulay today. Really wonderful to have you. My name is Dr. Sampur Farzaneh. I am the director of the Center for Multi-Religious Studies at Starr King. I'm also an associate faculty member. And I'm going to just say a few words about the center and its work, including the House of Dates program, which you're joining today as part of the fourth annual lecture, before passing it over to my colleague, Teamash here, who will guide us for the rest of the afternoon in Ariella's talk. The Center for Multi-Religious Studies is a premier hub for the academic and vocational exploration of multi-religious identity and practice. The first of its kind, the center offers research, symposia, and public programs that advance scholarship and dialogue about multi-religious spiritual formation, ritual arts, education, and their interrelated dimensions, specifically focusing on the Starr King pedagogical model of educating to counter oppressions and creating just and sustainable communities. And just a word in case you haven't really come across the term multi-religious before. The idea is from where our perspective comes from pedagogically as well as vocationally as well as spiritually is that religious identity does not have to be binary in nature. That we could be Muslim and Jewish, we could be spiritual and religious, we could be Catholic and Hindu. Some people are all of those things, some people are none of them. And Starr King, the Center for Multi-Religious Studies, was founded in several years ago by many of us to support the study of this non-binary religious identity, both for individuals but also communities, saying that we could have spiritual communities that welcome many different traditions who are equal partners in the life and livelihood of those communities. And this annual lecture series is part of that, as well as several other things that we do. We sponsor sessions within the Starr King annual symposium, as well as other public programs like this one. We offer courses in a diverse array of religious and spiritual traditions. We have certificates in multi-religious studies and psychedelic justice and companioning. We do multi-religious chaplaincy training in coordination with Starr King's chaplaincy concentration. And we also have this really cool thing called the Tapestry, which is a repository of multi-religious articles, media, curricula, and educational materials. I'll link in the chat later on so that you can see some of the things that we do. And if you'd like to participate, please feel free to subscribe to our emails. And a newer initiative that we have taken over the past couple of years is called the House of Dates. And House of Dates is an ongoing series presented by the Center and co-sponsored by the Sarah and Hajar series, and in partnership with Muslim and Jewish voices from diverse backgrounds and histories. This series offers opportunities for deep learning, multi-religious worship, and chaplaincy training, demonstrating a commitment by Jews, Muslims, and their allies to counter Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and advocate for peace and justice in Palestine. So we just are really grateful that you've joined us today for this really special lecture. And without belaboring the point and speaking too much about what we do, I'd like for you to just participate in it and invite my colleague Tea Mashir to continue.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Sam, and welcome all to Reclaiming Jewish Muslim Belonging as Anti-Colonial Ancestral Practice with Ariella Aisha Azoulay. Ariella Aisha Azoulay is an author, curator of anti-colonial archives, film essayist, and theorist of photography and material culture. She's a professor of modern culture and media and comparative literature at Brown University. Ariella Aisha is of Algerian and Palestinian descent and identifies as a Muslim Jew, which she powerfully unpacks in her article, Unlearning Our Settler Colonial Tongues. Azoulay recently published The Jewelers of the Ummah, a potential history of the Jewish Muslim world through Verso Books. And her children's story, Golden Threads, recently published by Ayin Press, is an illustrated tale of Jewish and Muslim traditional crafts and communal power, challenging the visual legacy of colonial photography in Morocco in the early 20th century. I personally have been so deeply impacted and inspired by Ariella Aisha's work, and I'm just so excited and delighted to get to be in conversation with you here. Ariella, welcome. It's such a gift to have you with us.
I'll have to unmute myself. Thank you, Dr. Sam, and thank you, Thaya Mashir. I'm really excited to be in conversation with you once again. It is so inspiring always to share space with you. So thank you for inviting me.
The subtitle of your book, The Jewelers of the Ummah, which I have a little blurry here, is great. We can see it more clearly through you. It's one of my absolutely favorite books of all time. The subtitle of this book, A Potential History of the Jewish Muslim World, unpack that for us. What does that mean? A potential history of the Jewish Muslim world. What is the Jewish Muslim world as you understand it?
So I think that we have to approach it on, from very different, perspectives and also sentiments and also moods, because, you know, uh, through several campaigns of violence, this world was destroyed and it was substituted with a totally false, history and planted memories called the Judeo-Christian world. So when I am engaging with the Jewish Muslim world, I'm trying, first of all, to unlearn the Judeo-Christian tradition that was imposed as history, as real, narrative. The other way to engage with it is just, to recover what we were dispossessed of, which is this kind of shared legacy. Uh, and it's also an attempt to undo a little bit the firm and rigid way that, several colonial projects shaped the different religion. Because I think that when we understand, when we have access to, the beginning of Islam, for example, we can track down, many of the affinities between Judaism and Islam, because none of them was cohesive as Europe invented them later on. So the Jewelers of the Ummah is an attempt through several, letters that I'm addressing to kin and elected kin to unlearn the Judeo-Christian and to inhabit the Jewish-Muslim world. And actually, what we have to inhabit are ruins. So the question is how we inhabit ruins together with others through different practices, through different imaginaries, and through our hands, in the sense that the focus of the book is the jewelry making, but the jewelry making not only through the way that we understand craft, but jewelry making as one of the constitutive, I would say, glue of different communities in what used to be the Jewish Muslim world. And today we relate to it as the Muslim world or the Arab world. Both are very problematic categories.
Thank you so much for this. When you say we inhabit ruins, what does that mean?
You know, imperialism, colonialism, racial capitalism destroys so much. And we, over, centuries, we have been left with ruins. So the way that colonialism operates is to remove the ruins and tell us that the new, that the modern, that modernization is our future. And by that, they invent the future and they continue to turn what they destroyed into things that should be really removed from the space, from shared spaces, from our memory, from our muscular memory. And what I'm trying to do in the book is to acknowledge the existence of so many ruins of the Jewish Muslim world that existed for so long without, I would say, a framework. And I think that what I'm trying to do in the book is to give a framework to many things that people experienced as ruins. But I think that, with the book, through the letters, because I'm not alone in, mapping, in trying to make it palpable, this world or these ruins, in order to be able to inhabit them. I'm not alone in the sense that I have at least 16 interlocutors throughout the book that through our exchanges, this world is obviously there. And the term ruin is a way to describe the damage that colonialism, created, or what colonialism left, and what is still under threat to be considered obsolete, to be considered totally hallucinatory. Because, there is something very troubling with the way that imperial coloniality or colonial imperialism shape what is true and what is not true. And while the Jewish Muslim world, just existed for centuries since the beginning of Islam, until I would say the beginning of the 19th century, when it started to be, fragmented, when it started to suffer from colonial and imperial interventions, and slowly, slowly over, 100 years, they decimated, the Jewish Muslim world. And in the wake of the Second World War, imperial powers that always, worked in orchestra, I would say, they invented a history that never existed, which is the Judeo-Christian tradition or the Judeo-Christian history. So I think that there is something very, I don't know, it escapes us, it evades us. How come that, what we used to believe or what we were trained or socialized to believe that exists really, like the Judeo-Christian, how much work is needed in order to undo it and to be able to have access to what was destroyed but never, never totally evaporated. And I think that this is what the book attempts to transmit, is that just look around and see how many ruins are there. And if we understand, our existence in this world as an existence that has an obligation to repair the ruins, we cannot stop seeing them. We cannot stop to attend to them. And I think that this, occasion, your work or the occasion of, creating this kind of, gathering is part of this effort that many of us are being invested in. And especially during this time when a genocide is exercised in Gaza and in general in Palestine against Palestinians by the same imperial powers that invented Zionism, invented the Jewish problem, and invented Palestine as a problem, and fused both of them together as part of cultivating, this notion that they had more power to impose in the wake of World War II, this notion of a Judeo-Christian world and telos and destiny.
I'm so moved by what you're sharing here, and I've heard you speak about kind of the challenge and the gift of what happens when you divest from identity prescribed by colonialism or imperialism. Kind of what happens. Like, I've heard you speak about, how do I return to pre-colonial roots? What is that process like? I'm wondering if you'll speak to that a bit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, I was born in the Zionist colony in Palestine, and there is an identity, an instant identity that had no history, was imposed on me as my real identity. We call it the Israeli identity. And this identity had several roles. One of them is to erase Palestine. And the other one is to cut our modes of belonging to other worlds. So in my particular case, it was, an eraser, like a rubber with which you erase identity as if it's, a word that you wrote by mistake. But these are not words. Identities are not just words, but they erased the Israeli identity or the Zionist project in general, and European colonial projects like the French colonization of Algeria. All these, colonial projects are meant to erase our forms of belonging to worlds that posed obstacle to the expansion of colonial projects. So my family from the paternal side was, Algerian Jews. And even when I'm saying Algerian Jews, it's a kind of generality because, they were Jews from Iran, they were from Alger, and some of them, came from Andalusia. And from my maternal side, we come from the expulsion from Spain when Jews and Muslims were expelled from Spain through France, Bulgaria, Palestine before the Zionist project. So, the identities that were the simple, description or the simple forms of belonging of my ancestors, like Palestinian Jews and like Algerian Jews, these were identities that were made unimaginable, even unlawful. You could, as if you could not even, legally write them in any form when you are being asked to write your identities. So claiming that I am an Algerian Jew or a Palestinian Jew or both is a way to refuse to identify myself in the identities that were forced on me as actually forms of violence and as a mode to weaponize people, to weaponize babies, uh, uh, and to use them in colonial and national projects like the creation of a state in Palestine, on the ruins of Palestine.
Thank you so much for unpacking this. I'm curious what supports the anchoring of multiple identities, what supports kind of returning to and innovating, kind of reclaiming roots. And one of the things I love in your work is a way you embody what we at the center would know as skull artivism. Our beloved provost of blessed memory at Star King would talk off, Sheikh Ibrahim Baba Farajaje would speak of the role of skull artivists. And I experience your work so much as a, a, a mosaic of scholarship, art, activism, and kind of also a reclamation of ancestral and indigenous art. And you're in your work, you're in active conversation with your familial ancestors, with ancestors of inspiration. How does one create kind of and reinvigorate identity and be in a process of whole making in the way that you are?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think that there are several terms that I would like maybe to engage with. First of all, the term identity. The term identity is a very colonial term because, when I'm thinking about my ancestors, I cannot imagine them, in the 18th century, even not in the beginning of the 19th century, asking themselves, who am I? And having to choose, like in the supermarket between this or that. It's totally unrelated to their world. So rather than using the term identity, I prefer usually to speak about belonging. And we belong to worlds because there is something about, the way that colonial projects, imperial project, racial capitalist project came together, were entangled with projects of modernization, project of, liberal thinking, and this liberal thinking, puts a lot of weight on the individual. And I think that my ancestors were part of communities. So it makes much more sense to speak about, forms of belonging. Uh, uh, and they add, different levels of belonging to different things in the world that they shared with others. So I think that, they belong to their particular synagogue. They belong to their particular community that was, either in port cities, which is totally different because it's more, citadin way of lives, or they belonged, more to the desert-like area, like in the Mzeb in Algeria or in other places like the Atlas Mountain. So I think that all these forms of belonging were never reduced to their faith, to what we call faith. So colonialism, invaded North Africa in Algeria. It happened in the 1830, but actually this project started with the invasion of Egypt at the beginning of the 19th century. And this colonial project actually was part of a broader project, which was to codify Judaism and to codify Islam in order to create out of them more cohesive, more palpable, more digestible, idea of religion. saying that colonialism, Napoleonic wars, and the invasion of Algeria and the Maghreb in general was a project of forcing people to identify themselves, not only by their religious faith, but also in opposition to others. So it was really a very a sharp violence, I would say. I would describe it really as a sharp, blows one after the other that told, Jews, you belong here, and told Muslims, you belong here. It arrived, even to a kind of absurdities or even ridiculous, gestures, like, for example, telling the Jews that the star with 6 points is a Jewish star, while the star with 5 points is a Muslim star. So all these, forms of violence created and imposed the idea, the notion of identity as something that people carry with them. But identity is not a kind of good or commodity that you carry with you without a community. So they are fragmented. Not only are they dissociated, Jews from Muslims, but they fragmented all the other modes of Jewish belonging in order to create a general idea of the Jewish people. And this was the leverage to create a Jewish history that is disconnected from the worlds in which Jews lived. And what mattered to me, in this project of the Jewelers of the Ummah, is to say that one of the forms, one of the essential forms of belonging of the Jews to their different communities in the Maghreb is through their professions. And their professions was mainly craftspeople. The Jews made a lot of craft, and mainly, most of the jewelers of the Ummah were Jews. And I insist on this because it has so many I don't know, so many important points because in order for, for Europe and later on the Zionists to narrate the story of the Jews as one people with a history that leads to the colonization of Palestine under the idea of creating a state for the Jews is because they erased the physical and the material presence in the Jewish Muslim world. And the jewelers of the Ummah, I'm coming back to your question, your earlier question about what does it mean to inhabit the ruins. The jewelers of the Ummah, one of its point of departure is saying, but there are so many pieces of jewelry that were made by Jews that carry so much of this history of belonging to the Jewish Muslim world, not as identity, because the Jews fabricated, jewelry for Jews and Muslims. Most of them were the same pieces of jewelry, and some of them were particularly, Jewish, and some of them were particularly Muslims. But it doesn't mean that Muslim didn't, wear Jewish jewels and the other way around. So the craft, when I understand it as a mode of transmission, allows me to re-anchor the Jews in the Jewish Muslim world through material objects because this European idea of the Jews that was the catalyst, was the accelerator to uproot the Jews from all their communities around the world and to create this idea of the Jewish people is being, subverted through the presence of objects that has strong connection to, physical realities that are, these objects are like sites of entanglement of Jews and Muslims in all these places. So yes, mosaics, but mosaics that involve, muscular memory, that involves objects, that involves traditions that are related to those objects, that involve, liturgy, that involve many things, out of which the worlds of my ancestors were made of.
This is so powerful. You write about ways that capitalism and colonialism separate us from our own belonging with each other in our place and also belonging with the natural world. There's a particular passage I love in your work where you go from breaking down um, certain aspects of history to inhabiting the voice of the silkworms who go on strike when they're being asked to produce faster and in impossible ways. And I'm wondering what it's like to be in dialogue also with the natural world as a re-inhabiting of belonging.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, the materials out of which, jewelries are made, these are materials that you take from, the earth, that you take, it's part of the soil, it's part of, nature. They continue to exist on our bodies in connection to other elements, right? To other, forces. Like, for example, wearing silver, jewelry is in direct connection with the moon, the way that we restart, things during full moon is part of very old traditions. So I think that, again, the jewelers of the Ummah is an attempt to say that the jewelry makers and craftspeople in general were also not only the guardians of the know-how of how to make jewelry or how to make, other objects, but they were the guardians of the capacity to say no to the destruction of the earth. They limited, mining. They limited, the number of silkworm that they are growing. They limited the number of hours that people worked. All this, liberal ideology that I don't know when, sometimes in the 20th century, people earned only 8 hours, of work. This is a total, propaganda because, you had to exploit people to a degree that then they had to struggle to go back to, the way that they work in connection with the earth, in connection, with the different cyclical temporalities, cyclical temporalities of the day, of the seasons, of many other things. And, when I started to study also, the guilds, that were destroyed when they destroyed the infrastructure of jewelry making, when they destroyed the infrastructure of crafts in Algeria. I realized that actually, without destroying it, they could not penetrate Algeria with racial capitalism because those craftspeople worked in guilds. And as I said earlier, they transmitted and they were the guardians of saying no to, when, for example, one of the Ottoman rulers asked to have more of something, they could say no. And this is what, the golden thread, the children book is about the capacity to say no when there is an injustice, when there is an abuse not only of people, abuse of, silkworm, abuse of the earth. So they were the guardians of the capacity to say no. They were the guardian of the earth. And also, they were the guardians of each other. In moments of, abundance, they share their commissions with others, other members in the guild. In moments, of when one of the members of the guild was sick, others paid for them. So we are speaking really about different fabrics of protection, different, fabrics of protection that are entangled with different meaningful objects that, convey the protection in connection to the moon, in connection to the earth, in connection to other creatures, in connection to the rain, in connection to many other things. All these fabrics had to be destroyed in order to dispossess people of their capacity, first of all, to sustain themselves, to sustain their communities together with others, and to make them the laborers in this horrible scheme of, copying just the patterns or the forms of jewels, for example, in the case of Algeria, and opening, colonial stores where they sold, those Algerian typical traditional jewelry that now were produced by jewelers who were dispossessed of their status as members in a guild and became the laborers that provided the colonists with their cheap labor that they could enrich themselves. So yes, it is about, caring for the world, caring for the community, caring for your profession, and caring that the knowledge that you inherited will not be destroyed, that you will be able to transmit it further. And we don't have to go, only to look for, recent examples. Enough to remember that, several texts the Jews, read are, for example, texts about, the Shabbat, text about Shemitah. Shemitah is every 7 years you stop abusing the land, right? When it comes to jewelry, there are so many, wisdom that is being transmitted, for example, through the Bible, through several, books, and it is part of my letter to Horia Butelja in the Jewelers of the Ummah, where I retrace, some of the way that making jewelry was understood already in the Bible. So this knowledge is a very old knowledge that was transmitted and developed and was shared with many others and was adapted to different situations because, communities were ruled by different governors in different places. Communities were displaced from one place to the other, but they always had, things that they inherited from their ancestors about how to and about how to say no and about how to protect what is being under threat. And this is what colonialism, worked hard to destroy, or didn't work hard, but used a lot of violence in order to destroy.
Hmm. Yes. And I'm wondering how you connect these strands, which feel so clearly applicable and important at this time around saying no to what is not whole, to what is not holy. How do you weave your work in to this current moment in terms of saying no to genocide, saying no to fascism? Like how do those threads connect for you?
Yeah, so I worked on this book for several years. And, when I submitted the manuscript to the publisher, the genocide started. And this is not a book about the genocide, but on the other hand, it felt so, relevant to the genocide because actually it gave the long history of, European or Euro-American violence against Jews, against Muslims, and against the Jewish Muslim world. And without understanding the systematic destruction of the Jewish Muslim world, without understanding the way that Europe invented the Jewish question as a problem, and invented Palestine as a problem and fused them together under, evangelical projects, but under many other projects. Without understanding this very long history, we cannot understand the genocide. Because the genocide, even though, these are the Israelis who are exercising the genocide, this is not, Israel against Palestine, because it doesn't exist as Israel against Palestine. We have to go back, to 45. We have to go back to the wake of World War II. After the extermination of, millions of Jews, Jews stayed in Europe from 45 to 48 in displaced persons camps. And when they stayed there, uh, 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 they were not allowed or were not encouraged to go back to their communities in Europe. And they were not tolerated or not invited or not allowed to enter the US. So they were the undesired in Europe, and they materialized in their own bodies the Jewish problem, what to do with them. And Zionism, that was, marginal movement in the life of Jews all over the world. It was not an important movement in the Middle East and in North Africa. Despite many efforts to penetrate the Middle East and North Africa, it stayed a very minor movement. It was also not the most important movement in Europe. There were others. The Bund is the most famous, but there were many other trends among Jews. So this relatively marginal movement that could not succeed unless if in the wake of World War II, as part of solving, with quotation mark, again, solving again the Jewish problem, Europe and the US that invented the UN as the organ through which they imposed a new world order, and this is their term, the new world order, they saw an opportunity in supporting the Zionist movement and in supporting the project of some of the Zionists to destroy Palestine and to take it over as a state for the Jews. So it was with a lot of, support. The Anglo-American committee that went to Palestine to inquire the question of partition, and then the UN resolution to partition Palestine. Why to partition Palestine? The Jews were a minority in Palestine. Why to split Palestine into two? Many things that today seems to us so, maybe obvious, like partitioning as if half-half, but there was no half-half to partition. Even the partition plan, which is so, violent, included that a transfer will be necessary of, 400,000 people from here, of Palestinians to the Palestinian state, etc. So, a lot of many, tools, instruments were used in order to normalize the idea of partitioning Palestine and the legitimacy of solving, with quotation mark, the Jewish problem with a state, rather than attending to the trauma of the Jews, the survivors who stayed in displaced person camps in Europe. They were given, with big quotation mark, they were given a state, which means they were mandated, the Zionists were mandated to destroy Palestine on the one hand, and to destroy all Jewish communities, diverse Jewish communities in the world, in order to have, human bodies to be able to sustain a Zionist state in Palestine. And I mentioned this in response to your question about today, because the genocide that started, 2, 3 days on October 8th or 9th could not, continue without all this, Western support in arms, in money, in propaganda, in deportation, in arrest, in persecution of Muslims, of Palestinians, of Jews who are anti-Zionist, and in using a lot of violence against different migrants. Without these different, technologies of violence, the genocide will not survive. Israel, the state of Israel alone, cannot exercise violence for so long. We see, every once in a while how much arms is being, shipped to Israel in order to enable Israel to continue the genocide. Going back to 45, we have to understand that the state of Israel could not come into, could not be created without all this, Western support to make it possible. And later on, after the state was proclaimed, without destroying Jewish communities in the Jewish Muslim worlds, the state could not sustain itself, because there were not enough Jews in this state in order to claim that this is a Jewish state and to defeat Palestinians, as they did once, one time after the other. So we have to understand the entire Zionist project not only as a project that is run by Jews, but as a project that the West is invested in its reproduction. And we see it today in relation to the genocide. So this is how I see the connection. And, writing a book about the destruction of the Jewish Muslim world is exactly trying to explain how we come to a point that, the destruction of Palestine was advocated in 48 as a Jewish, as a project of liberation for the Jews. And the book is an attempt to delineate other, projects of liberation for the Jews that are inseparable from all the other projects of liberation from Euro-American imperialism and imperial technologies.
Thank you so much, Ariella, Aisha. I'm so moved by what you're sharing, and I'm wondering now, if to bring it personal, again. I mean, this is all deeply personal, and you speak about what has happened in your own sense of belonging, when you enter into conversation, more directly with your grandmother, with your great grandmother, and how entering into ancestral conversations has changed your sense of belonging. And I'm wondering if you can share a bit about that experience and process with us.
Yeah, so maybe I'll say something general about, writing letters, because, these are not, when we say letters, we think about, an envelope and, one, two, three, 4 pages. These are not 3, 4 pages. These are long letters that were written over a long time. I think that I spent several years with my interlocutors. And the interlocutors are, my kin. The book opens with a letter to my father, and it ends with a letter to my mother that is followed by a letter to Hassan Kanafani. So it starts with the detachment from Algeria with my father, and it goes through different, elected kin like Frantz Fanon or Hannah Arendt or Horia Boutelja and others. And it ends in Palestine, and it ends in Palestine not as, a separate project, but actually as part of the same, European project of destruction of the Jewish Muslim world. Um, and writing these letters, it's something that, I like to describe uh, with a metaphor, or not a metaphor, maybe a comparison, uh, uh, because there is a lot of intimacy in the way that, my interlocutors are in my computer in a certain way. And why they are in my computer? Because, I open my computer every day and I spend hours in my computer, in front of my computer, using my computer, and they are always there, those to whom I started to write letters. And sometimes I felt like, it's like when you go back to sleep in the evening, uh, when you go to sleep in the evening, and the moment when you put your head on the pillow, you are being reminded of the dream of the night before. Because oftentimes, I'm in a hurry in the morning and I don't remember my dreams. I don't have time to ask myself, what did I dream last night? And they 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 escapes me very quickly. But when I'm coming back to bed and I put my head on the pillow, the dream is there. All of a sudden, I know exactly what I dreamt last night. And if I concentrate, if I close my eyes without falling asleep, I can really get myself into what was left of the dream, and sometimes continue the dream the day after. I mean, one day after. So in the letters, it felt the same. Every time, I went to teach and I came back and I opened the computer, and Frantz Fanon, for example, was always there. Or Hannah Arendt was always there. It was not the same experience like, writing, an academic text about them. It created really a kind of, epistolary space. Our epistolary space was different. It was made of different things. I reminded them different things that I had a feeling that they forgot. I reminded my parents or my great grandmother things that I had a feeling that they forgot, and they told me things that I didn't know. How this magic happened for those who were already dead. It happened because I believe that if we take seriously the idea that we don't have identities to ourselves, that we belong to a world. So each of us hold, pieces of this world. And when we come together, when I read their text or when I listen to them, we together hold, different pieces of this puzzle that we remind ourselves, we remind each other, what do we have? This is true also to something else that accompanied this, epistolary space. When I understood that the Jews were the majority of the jewelers in the Jewish Muslim world, I decided that I will reproduce the jewels that my ancestor did. And I decided it not in the perspective of I want now to be a jeweler, another identity, right? As if, being a jeweler is an identity. No, it was because if the majority of the Jews were the jewelers, I should have a muscular memory of making jewelry. So I started, to reproduce some of these forms. And this the same. I started to reproduce some of these forms, and very quickly I felt an urge to share this with others. So I created a table in the center of which I placed, different jewelry and objects from the Jewish Muslim worlds, some of them that I found, others that I reproduced. And I invited other descendants of the Jewish Muslim world to share with me, time around this table. I shared, different beads, different, threads of metallic threads. And I shared with them how I was able to awaken my muscular memory. And like a magic, together, 15, 16, people around the table in a session that lasted, 3, 4 hours, we were able to do many things together and to remind each other what we know about this jewelry that is beyond the object, that is related to the traditions in which the object was embedded. Uh, so I mentioned this in connection to writing the letters to the epistolary space because these are spaces where together we share through muscular memories, through narrations, through fabrication. We share many things in common, and rather than writing about those elected kin like Frantz Fanon, and speaking only with academics about the oversight of Frantz Fanon in connection to the Jews in Algeria, I'm speaking with him. So I'm creating this intimacy with him. I'm coming to his clinic. I am opening the door. I'm telling him, how come that you didn't recognize that my father also suffered from, the North African syndrome, on which he wrote, but he reduced it to Muslim Algerians. So I think that when I speak about, inhabiting the ruins, when I speak about the epistolary space, when I create these spaces of narration and fabrication, these are necessary spaces for reclaiming together the Jewish Muslim worlds, rather than, me alone writing a book about Jews in Algeria. This is not a book about Jews in Algeria. This is a book that is at one and the same time about and is the thing in itself that we inhabit together with others, because this world was not destroyed totally. This world is still there in ruins for us to inhabit and to reclaim it with others. Uh, so maybe I didn't reply directly to your question because you asked me about my grandmothers that I can speak about, but maybe we'll keep it for later.
Thank you so much, Ariella Aisha. We're receiving some great questions in the chat, which I will come to soon. If you do have questions and are tuning in live, feel welcome to continue sending them to me and Dr. Sam through Q&A. I want to ask just a couple questions more before turning to the chat, Ariella, which is you speak so powerfully about kind of the problematic nature of identity versus belonging. And I'm wondering if you can say more about how we can shift from the politicization of identity, which is so powerful and present in this current moment, more fully into creating and cultivating experiences of belonging. And I'm also wondering if you'll share more around the story of your grandmother, as it feels right.
Yeah. Um, so I'll go back, to the Zionist colony in Palestine. Uh, it's not only unlearning our identities. We have to aspire to struggle against, these technologies. And I prefer to call them technologies, not only institutions or nation states, because the nation state is a technology, the museum is a technology, the archive is a technology. So I think that, we have to unlearn and to create, distance between us and those technologies that wants us to believe that, or making everything in their, power, that we will believe that our identities is what they provide. And just think about, the Israeli identity. they destroyed Palestine in 47, 48, and from that moment on, they never stopped destroying Palestine. And they invented instantly an identity that they called the Israeli identity. But this identity had no history, had no memories. And when I'm saying it had no history, no memories, you remember when I spoke about, the craftspeople as the guardians of the memory to say no? All the memories, for example, from Morocco, and I will maybe describe it through this book, all the memories of, the Jews in Morocco who said no to so many things was erased once they were, deported or expelled or deracinated from their lands, and they were sent to Palestine to continue to destroy Palestine by their mere presence through the identity that is being called Israelis. So it's not like we can wake up in the morning and decide that we are forgetting about our identities and we are just speaking in terms of belonging. It is, part of, other liberation projects. The Jews, there are histories, the histories of the Jews, the memories of the Jews, the identities of the Jews, the forms of belonging of the Jews were totally, totally abused for a very long time. And they were given several times gifts with quotation mark. For example, the Crémier decree that made, Algerian Jews French citizens in their own country is described until today as a gift, right? They were given French citizenship, unlike Muslims that were not given this identity. So it's true that this, identity came with some rights, but this identity destroyed all their forms of belonging to Muslims, to other Jewish communities, to their crafts, to many other things. They were given, again with quotation mark, another poisonous gift, which is a state for the Jews. So I think that, and they were given Jewish studies, departments in universities that are cementing these kind of, European narratives of the Jews. The emancipation. I'm not saying that all the scholars in those departments are doing this kind of scholarship, but the department themselves, most of them, are entangled with Israeli studies, are based on this kind of European narratives of the Jews that goes from, they were miserable, we emancipated them with quotation mark, then there came the Holocaust, and we rescued them, again with quotation mark, and we gave them a state, right? It's a kind of, this is the arc of the story of the Jews with some milestones that seems like, indispensable, Lego blocks for any narrative of the Jews. So I think that there is a lot of work is required in order to unlearn together, order to undo these kind of, sequences, in order to physically refuse or reject the memories that were, implanted in our bodies as our histories. So the switch from identities to forms of belonging requires a lot of work of reclaiming our diverse histories. All the diverse Jewish histories had to be destroyed. All Jewish communities in the world, in Europe through, the extermination project, and then not allowing the Jews to restore their communities in Europe in the same places where they used to live. And in the Jewish Muslim world, in Latin America, in so many other places, histories of diverse histories of the Jews were destroyed in a way that it feels like our identity is the identity of the Jewish people fabricated by Euro-American Zionist, technologies. So I think that it requires really the reclamation of diverse histories. When, for example, in the US, I hear, Jews speaking about themselves as white, as if, they were not coming, from other histories, as if they were not forced to be whitened at a certain point, as if their whitening was not part of different, technologies of violence that forced them to forget their histories, to forget what Europe or the US did to them. So I think that, part of this kind of liberation project is to undo all these deals, bargains that were imposed on the Jews in a way that cut their tongue. And I really literally speak about cutting the tongue of the Jews because, we hear so much about the Holocaust, for example, about the exceptionalization of the suffering of the Jews. But this is not the story of the Jews. This is the European story, how then they came to rescue the Jews from what the Nazi did to them. It erases, everything else. So I think that the poisonous gift of imposing on the Jews the Zionists to represent them. Just think about this. What happened through the UN is that the Zionists were mandated to represent the Jews all over the world. So I think that, reclaiming our forms of belonging is reclaiming our diverse forms of belonging.
Thank you so much for this, Ariella, Aisha. I have some great questions in the chat and comments that I want to bring to you, and so appreciate folks who have been chiming in with them. First, we have a participant who says, this talk resonates so much with the history of the Hindu Muslim communities and their shared culture, including, and forgive my pronunciation, the Ganga and Jamuni Tehzeeb in South Asia and how it is undergoing an assault by Hindu nationalism. So there's this comment. I also want to bring a question. Ariella said that Zionism was not popular in the Jewish Muslim population. I'm wondering why it did not become popular in Algeria when it did in Europe. There's some more questions I want to bring in, but I'll just add this comment and question here.
Yeah, so thank you for this comment. I think that there is a lot to learn, from the similarities and the differences between, the partition of India and the way that, British colonialism created, this kind of what they called conflict between, Hindu and Muslims, and the way that the British mandate destroyed Palestine prior to the Zionist project and pit together, Jews against Palestinians. And also juxtaposing this to what the French colonial project did in Algeria, when they destroyed Jewish diversity, first in France, later on in Algeria, through this organ that they called the General Consistory, that was created as part of the Napoleonic project to codify Judaism, to decide which kind of prayers Jews are allowed to pray, which kind of liturgy they are allowed to use, etc., etc. So there are many resonances between this, and there are people that are studying, these affinities or these differences, and I think that studying together the different campaigns of violence in different places in the world is key for a liberation project from Europe, from Euro-American technologies. Because what really characterizes, I think, as the only one toward which people should aspire. And I think that we know very well that the history of decolonization of Africa or Asia was intercepted by these, Euro-American technologies that replaced decolonization with projects of independence. And projects of independence add to mature in the creation of nation states, and nation states are exactly the same purification machines that Europe used against all type of groups that Europe racialized over centuries. So I think that when I'm trying, in this book, The Jewelers of the Ummah, to reject the liberation projects that Europe imposed on the Jews through the Zionist project, and to describe and to reclaim Jewish diversity or the undoing of the cohesiveness of the Jewish people, it is part of the way that I'm trying to imagine the allyship between Jewish liberation projects and Black liberation projects, Muslim liberation projects, indigenous liberation projects, etc. There is something totally absurd in the way that Europe racialized the Jews for so long and at a certain moment declare this is over. Now we gave you a state with quotation mark, and now you have no more, claims to put forward. This is related to what I mentioned earlier, cutting the tongues of the Jews, because these colonial gifts are actually colonial gifts that for a long time, our anti-Zionist heritage was could not find enough power together to uh, 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 to state, vocally in public spaces, that this project never represented us, and we have many anti-colonial and anti-Zionist ancestors that we were dispossessed of, that they are our belonging to our ancestors who were anti-Zionist was also fragmented. So it's not only our belonging to the Jewish Muslim world, it's also our belonging to our ancestors that at the right moment said no to Zionism. And this brings me to the second question. How come, that in Algeria, Zionism could not, find anchors? Um, I don't think that I can answer a question, how come, but I would like to state or to repeat or to say it, overtly, uh, uh, strongly, that while Jews were already expelled under different bargains from different places in the Jewish Muslim world, Algerian Jews didn't leave until 62. Until 62, the moment when Algeria defeated the French was the moment when Algerian Jews left Algeria. They didn't leave earlier. The State of Israel was created already since 48, and they didn't migrate to the Zionist state. And in 62, when they left Algeria, because they were not left with many other choices, because, two colonial projects made it almost impossible. The French colonization of Algeria and the Zionist colonization of Palestine that endangered the life of Jews all over the Jewish Muslim world. So, and in 62, when they had to leave Algeria, only 20% of them went to the Zionist colony in Palestine. The rest of them went to France or to Canada. Uh, and in 63, through the mediation of the Jewish Agency, some of the key figures of the Jews who migrated from Algeria to the Zionist colony in Palestine were put on trial. Why they didn't bring with them Algerian Jews? As if, Algerian Jews would go after someone who will tell them, let's go to colonize Palestine. So they were put on trial, a trial that they felt, humiliated by. And rather than rejecting this Zionist, violence, they started to advocate no, no, Algerian Jews were always Zionist, etc. But it's just because, they wanted to not to appear as if they were not good citizens in the Zionist state. But this was when 80% of Algerian Jews refused to go to Palestine. 80% of Algerian Jews resisted this kind of temptation. Come to Palestine. There is a liberation project there. They said, no, this is not our liberation project. And they left to Canada and France. But with the years, generation after generation, when you erase the memory of people, babies are being born to believe that the Zionist project is their project. And I am one of, those who were born in the Zionist colony in Palestine to believe that I am a baby of this project. And it took me a while to unlearn this history and to reclaim other histories. So I'm an Algerian Jew, and I'm speaking now when I'm trying to answer this question, I'm speaking not only as a scholar, but I'm speaking about, my personal experience as a descendant of families, Cohen family, Azoulay family, Bumendil family, that when I started to study them, I discovered so many anti-Zionist among them, so many anti-patriot among them, so many anti-colonial among them. To start with my grandfather, that I didn't know that in Algeria he refused to go to the French army during World War One, and he was put in prison. And my great grandmother, to whom I write one of the letters, a letter to Julie Bumendil, that was his mother, and she was a single mother, and she backed him in his decision to desert the army and not to join the French army, while the history book about the Jews in Algeria tell us that they were patriotic and all of them went to join the French army to go on war to join World War One. Um, so yeah, Algerian Jews didn't buy the Zionist project, but after one, two, three generations, with the erasure of memory, many of them also became Zionist. But now many of us are anti-Zionist, proud anti-Zionist and anti-colonial, and dreaming about other liberation projects, starting by stopping the genocide and the genocidal regime that perpetrate the genocide.
Thank you so much, Ariella, Aisha. There are so many fabulous questions coming in. One that I want to bring next. I'm curious how you view our current shift to authoritarian white Christian politics in the US, and how your explanation of contemporary efforts at creating or rewriting American identity, who is included and who isn't. This is a question from someone who's tuned in.
Yeah, no, I don't think that I can, really speak about American culture. I live here for 12 years, and I'm still an observant. I'm looking around to understand. And I think that the shift didn't start, with the Trump administration. This is, one of the things that I can say in response to this question. I think that we have to look at the genocide and the way that the genocide really was amplified from the US, and this already created a shift in any possible description of American identity, because when a genocide is perpetrated from where people live, their identity is being impacted. So Trump is the continuation, it's not a break. And I think that considering that the shift happened with Trump is ignoring that during 1 year and a half, a genocide was perpetrated by a different administration. And while millions in the street in the US and in other places in the world understood that this is a genocide, protested against the genocide, said no to the genocide, millions learned the story or unlearned the story of Israel Palestine during the genocide because it was so easy to understand this injustice, this propaganda, while millions said no, no, the administration forced the narrative that this genocide is a self-defense, or I don't know how they explained it. So while I see all the horrible things that this current administration is doing, I insist on the fact that we have to be reminded that the genocide was the shift, or one of the shifts. There was never, genocidal technologies were always, entangled with U.S. Administration and other mechanisms.
Thank you
Another
so
explanation.
much. Another question from someone tuned in. Do you see a possibility for Jews and Muslims to live side by side in Palestine, given what has taken place in the past decades, and especially since October 7th? What would be your highest vision for peace? Perhaps a reclamation of diverse stories, as you mentioned, as a start. Do you imagine that many people, many Jewish people who made Aliyah to eventually be moved, may eventually be moved from their heart to go back to their country of their more recent ancestors?
So I think that uh, the question should be reformulated. It's not a question, can Jews and Muslims in Palestine live side by side? I mean, the question is, are those who perpetrate genocide and the victims of genocide can live side by side? These are not Jews and these are not Muslims. First of all, they are Christians in Palestine, but it's not because they are Christians or Muslims. It's they were colonized. They are colonized. So the question is the same way that it was, in Europe. Could the Jews live side by side with their perpetrators? The question is, can the Palestinians live side by side with their perpetrators? So I think that I refuse to reply to the answer to the question when we keep this, as Jews and Muslims. It is not about Jews and Muslims. And coming back to what I said earlier about, the Euro-American use, instrumentalization of Zionism in order to impose a new world order, through which the Jews were removed from the Jewish Muslim world. European communities were weakened. They were belittled. They were not allowed to be revived in their own places. And Palestine was imposed as their destiny or as their destination. This, violence that was perpetrated at the time was also a violence that replaced Europe as enemy, because Europe was the enemy of the Jews. Replacing Europe as the enemy of the Jews with Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians. We have to be reminded of that. And once we are being reminded of that historically, that Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians were never, never, never the enemies of the Jews, the question of can they live side by side again is a European question, is a European question that creates the impossibility to imagine that they can live side by side together. But the history tells us that they lived not only side by side, they lived in an entangled way, interlaced way. They lived, their traditions were intertwined for centuries, for, more than 1,000 years. So the question, and I don't know who asked the question, but the question itself, really one term under the other, should be undone, because the question itself is a European question that wants us to believe that, normally European reconciliation project should be exercised in order to bring Jews and Muslims to live together. No, this is propaganda. Jews and Muslims always live together, and they have to reclaim together their histories. When it comes to Palestine, there is a dramatic change. The Zionists in Palestine, the Israelis, are committing genocide. While in 48, not all the Jews who were there committed, the Nakba. Today, the Israeli society is mobilized to perpetrate the genocide. So the question, the day when the genocide will end, and I don't know exactly what does it mean to end the genocide, that, already created so many processes that it will be so hard, to stop them, to revert them in a way that the genocide will last way after it will be declared over. But the day that it will be declared over, the question is, can the perpetrators live together with the victims? And here I would like to go, to the example of Algeria and to the end of the liberation war, the revolutionary war of Algerians against the French. The French could not leave Algeria. They could stay there if they will accept that they had been defeated. And I think that when we think about Palestine, I don't think that the only way to think about it is, narrating more, scary project about now the deportation of the Jews. The question is how to undo all the genocidal technologies, how to undo the genocidal regime. For me, it is not only about a genocide, it's about a genocidal regime that can attack Palestinians the way that Palestinians had been attacked since 48 and can socialize the Israeli citizens to believe that this is their right to dispossess, to continue to dispossess Palestinians. So this is for me a genocidal regime because the settler colonial regime is a genocidal regime. So the question is how to undo the genocidal regime and not to ask how can could Palestinians, sorry, Jews and Muslims live side by side in Palestine.
Thank you so much, Ariella Aisha. Another question from someone tuning in. I'd love to know whether you have written about or worked with the indigenous Maziren in Algeria and whether there are any specific learnings or outcomes from connections there, in addition to Jewish and Arab Muslim connections and belonging. How do indigenous Maziren come into play here?
Uh, I'm also a Mazir. My origin are Mazir and Arabs and Jewish and Muslims. And when you think about the Maghreb, most of the people were Berber were Amazigh, and they were Judaized, and then they were Arabized, and then they were Islamized, and then they were Frenchified, and or Ottomanized, sorry, and then Frenchified. Uh, so the Amazigh culture is part of many of the inhabitants of the Maghreb and those in the diaspora. Uh, I've I didn't visit Algeria yet. I just recently learned that I will be allowed to enter Algeria. I will have my visa, and this is, when I will meet other Amazigh, but I will not meet them as if I have to learn, from their experience of the Amazigh as, separate from mine. I will learn from them many of the traditions that I was dispossessed of. So rather than thinking about, the Jews as separate from the Amazigh, the question is how Jews who are also Amazigh can reclaim their traditions. And certainly, part of what will make it possible is a series of exchange with Amazigh who were managed to transmit their traditions over the years, despite the French colonial project.
I'm so heartened to hear that you'll be able to immerse in this way. And I want to kind of come full circle here as we begin to move toward landing, which is, I feel so much at the heart of your work really invites us to unlearn ways of codifying traditions, understanding them as separate, and to really be actively engaged in a process um, of unlearning and reclaiming. And so much of our work at the Center for Multi-Religious Studies is problematizing questions of codification and separateness, and really finding places of embodied bridge practice, kind of embodied multiplicity of practice. And I'm wondering if you have invitations, suggestions, pathways for exploration for folks who are kind of newly on their path of unlearning, decodifying, seeking to engage in ways that invite greater belonging.
Um, I don't know. I think that there are many different initiatives all over. People are feeling that, they were socialized to believe in too many lies about their lives, the lives of others. And I think that, I don't know to whom the question is directed or who is asking the question, but I can just maybe say something from my experience when I arrived to the US 12 years ago. And I heard the term American Jewry, American Jewry. I wonder, what does it mean? Where are the histories of all these people who are, hidden behind this category of American Jewry? And I know that, vis-a-vis my students, I'll always recommend to them to track down their histories because their history is not American Jewry. So the unlearning is unlearning the American Jewry, which is another generalization. And I think that without reclaiming our diverse histories, without putting right, the building blocks of, our imaginaries, of our forms of belonging, of our possibilities to share the world with others, without this, we cannot do any, work of any serious anti-colonial work. And maybe, a way of answering to your question is, to mention, we just finished the Mimuna, right? A few days ago. Mimuna is a Jewish holiday that ends Pesach, ends Passover, one day after the end of Passover. And it's a holiday that was celebrated in the Jewish Muslim world. And what characterizes, this holiday is that, if Jews had to get rid of, all the grains that they have at home, which is a common, Jewish tradition, in order not to eat, bread and any other, grain that rises and create breads, cakes, etc., etc. So this is a common Jewish tradition, but in the Jewish Muslim world, the Jews symbolically sold the grain to their neighbors, the Muslims, and at the day when the holiday ended, their neighbors came with the flour in the eve of the day in order for them to be able to celebrate with bread. So, the stores were already closed. It's the evening, and their neighbors came with cakes, came with flour, came with mufleta, which is one of the typical, dough that you fry on the day of the Mimuna. And this was entangled with other traditions because politically Jews were inferior to Muslims in the Jewish Muslim world. And during the Mimuna, it was the day where the roles were reversed. Uh, so there were many, many forms of celebrating, holidays that brought together, even in those distinct, moments where Jews gathered together, many moments where Jews opened their doors and invited Muslims to participate in their holidays. And the same is true also for Ramadan that ended also not very long time ago. So I think that the unlearning is also through the unlearning of the way that traditions were solidified, for example, as part of American Jewry, that erased, the traditions of different communities, of different, Jews that are coming from different communities that had their own traditions. So everything that can facilitate the unlearning of the European invention of the Jewish people and the reclamation of diverse Jewish identities or diverse Jewish forms of belonging is already part of or a way of participating in a global project of liberation from Zionism, liberation from European technologies. And there is maybe one thing that is very important is to disconnect from what they called and market as the AI, right? To say no to the way that people are being made over and over again disposable and not collaborate with this kind of same technology with new clothing that tells us that we can do the work for you. I think that unlearning the idea of the Jewish people, reclaiming our diverse identities, reclaiming our grounding in the world through the labor of our hands, reclaiming our ancestral tradition of saying no, reclaiming our ancestral distance from power. One of the things that characterize all Jewish communities for hundreds of years is their distance from power. Dina de Malchuta Dina. I mean, our law is not the law of empire. So all these are part of the threads that we have to weave together as part of joining other liberation projects, other anti-colonial projects.
Thank you so much for what you've shared just now and what you've shared throughout our time today. It's just such a gift to receive your work, your transmissions, and your kind of way of creating in the world. It's deeply moving to me. Thank you, and
Thank you
I'm
very much. Thank you, Sam, and pleasure to be in conversation, as always.
and Sam, I'll pass to you
Thank
to
you.
bring us to a close.
Thank you, Tia, so much for your wonderful facilitation as always. And Ariella, we really, really appreciate your presence here today and encouraging us to think deeply and critically about these issues. Such a wonderful, wonderful presentation from many different aspects, and even just rethinking the word identity and the way that we use it. I think it's a really wonderful contribution. So, on behalf of everyone that attended and the center and Star King, thank you so much for your presence today.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
For all of those watching, I just want to encourage us to reflect on what's been said today. And if you'd like to take some sort of action, I've shared the link again in the chat, or if you're watching later, it's sksm.edu/house of dates. That will take you to the website. At the very bottom of the page, there are some ways to take action if you'd like to do so. And also, our next event will be next Thursday, May the 1st, on at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be doing a film screening of Where Olive Trees Weep. So if you'd like to look into that, please do follow that website link. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you soon, and thank you again for your attendance today.